And we're live. Hello,
Hey
everyone.
everybody.
I do apologize for Wednesday's stream. There was a storm going around in my area, and I was getting constant blackouts and brownouts like every hour or so. We got terrible timing and terrible weather happening at the same time. So, no, we were not being censored or anything like that, to the best of my knowledge. It was just crappy weather and
Yeah,
or
because
crappy service.
some people in the back alley noted it was as soon as I forget which subject that they were making the connection with. I think it was when we started talking about. Do you remember which one it was? Because I'm blanking at the moment.
I don't,
Um,
unfortunately.
there was a subject we were talking about, and the stream cut out like right around the time where we started talking about that, and people were suspecting that YouTube cut the stream to try and censor us. But no, it was just bad weather, and honestly, that was a bit of a blessing in disguise for me because I was operating on like potato brain for that entire stream because fucking I only got like 2 hours of sleep before that. You can probably tell if you went back to watch it based on the abnormal amount of thought buffers and some things that I didn't respond to in his initial arguments. Um, Points that he was making and counters that I could have easily presented, but I didn't like how he's arguing that the political market as we see it in modernity and just markets in general are influenced by uh, the same sort of are the same characteristics. They embody the same characteristics. So just economic study in general uh, would be capitalist, quote unquote,
Hmm.
which that's like Vicky to your argumentation because that would literally mean that like ANCAP Keynesianism is a thing within his own reasoning. But no, there's an obvious difference between the political market and then just people economizing with their own resources. You know, gift economies can exist, mutual aid exchanges can exist, and that's not even necessarily tied to the cash nexus. Whereas the political economy, where supply enters into that, the financial aspect of the white market is all heavily influenced by state planning and institutions like the World Trade Organization, the Trilateral Commission, the World Economic Forum, etc., who are able to determine at what rate certain supply enters into what parts of the world and which corporations have the first for which white market actors have first access to those resources, and to argue that this is just a natural product of competition. uh yeah, there are so many problems there, it's kind of difficult to even know where to begin.
I mean, it's
And then there's how competition is being used both in the economic sense, which is literally to mean just more than one actor is present. So there isn't any sort of systemic leverage one actor would have over another, um, because in that situation, you know, they could people who are trading with them could just go to another, and people would have incentives to provide that service if the initial one was engaging in any sort of biased practices or is engaging in any sort of just behavior they generally don't like. conflating that with competition in a sort of evolutionary sense, which is something Marxists do a lot.
And Kajoltad, you are right. This guy does look like a Redditor.
Yeah, we pointed out in the very first episode, I guess, that he bears a striking resemblance to the owner of Al's Toy Barn.
Mm-hmm.
But also, I don't know if the meme is on screen right now, but I made this meme today, and it's this guy's receding hairline looks like the C in the Pac-Man logo, so
Yeah,
that's just what's gonna be on screen here.
it's on screen. People can see it. And honestly, I have
I
no
mean,
interest in taking it
either
off.
that or you know he's trying to signal Batman with his forehead.
I mean, that certainly is a possibility. Probably needs bushier eyebrows, but definitely with with that the line on his glasses, you could actually make it out. Yeah. Anyways,
But
yeah, I was just going to add that one thing I've observed with Marxists, and it's kind of crystallized a lot more, especially after I did more research into looking into neoliberalism as an idea, is that, well, Marxists don't really have any freaking idea what the people they're replying to actually think and actually believe. Everything that they are responding to is always some kind of gross oversimplification and extreme amalgamation of what people actually believe into an incoherent morass of hilariously conflicting ideas that have no nuance whatsoever. I mean, I can't tell you how many times that Marxists have thrown John Maynard Keynes in my face, asking me to respond to some hot take that he made, because they think like, oh well, you know, he's a capitalist, so because he's a capitalist, all capitalists must agree with him.
You know, that's ignoring the fact that Heretic and I are skeptics of quote unquote capitalism by any standard of the term. But
I mean, all they've really done is just amalgamate people's ideas into a kind of oppositional stance, where they just have a single overarching narrative that replies to everything anyone that ever opposes them could ever say ever. And as a result, they have no ability to actually address the arguments specifically. And without having to actually address those arguments, they have no need to, learn what their opponents actually think. But this puts them at a significant disadvantage rhetorically because, as I'm sure you're aware, you have to beat your enemy first. You have to know them, and they have demonstrated on numerous occasions that they don't know anything about what any non-Marxist has ever believed ever.
yeah, and this isn't really so much that they only have a handful of stock replies. More, it's that Marxists don't really know how to deal with epistemology. Their entire, like the entire framework, any argument that they make operates around are it's two things: induction and inference, as in what counts as a concept and what a concept is just something that is observed around an arbitrary standard, whether it's senses or some generalized trend. The nature of that thing is just assumed without being demonstrated. It exists entirely in a vacuum within their the framework that they're arguing from. So that cloud that looks like a unicorn in the sky, that's not your brain. That's not your brain putting together shapes and making things up. That might literally be a unicorn, but but yeah, and induction, taking these concepts that they've made explanations up for, they've made definitions for, and putting them together and deriving their conclusions based around what happens when you mash these things together. So and the conclusion of that is a worldview that light scrutiny of what informs its principles causes it to completely implode in on itself. That's why there are like 100 different subgroups within Marxist philosophy, because all of those groups are arguing fundamentally what Marx did. It's just they have different ideas of what counts as the socialist step in the material dialectic. What counts as socialism there, or what counts as a proletarian. Marxists can't handle disputes over epistemology because their epistemology is entirely arbitrary. So, and this is something that you're beginning to see even internally within Marxist groups within the BreadTube community, except where Marx-Leninism, because they're not fully pointing out that this is a problem with Marxism yet. I don't know if they're just not ready, or if they're not ready to do that, or if they haven't genuinely made that connection. But Existential Comics, of all people, put out a comic making this point, and a YouTuber who I think their channel is called Anarchos, who is an ANCOM of the Marxian variety. So self-proclaimed ANCOM, but not actually ANCOM. They've both made the same point fairly recently about Marx-Leninism, which is that it doesn't any hypothesis being put forward within the Marx-Leninist framework can't be corrected. There's no way that within the internal reasoning of Marx-Leninism you can point to something one of them says and say, well, this is incorrect. There's no false means of falsification. Now, what they either are ignoring or aren't pointing out yet is that this is actually a problem inherent to Marxism. But Marx-Leninism just has this. I mean, Marx-Leninism has this problem as well, but that's because it's a variant of Marxism.
Every variant of Marxism that will ever exist ever is going to have this problem.
Just the fact that this is starting to happen, this sort of debate is starting to happen, means there's a noticeable crack in their movement right now. But yeah, if you look at the response that both of them have received, Marxists are starting to eat their own. They're losing their minds because they can't deal with that. They don't know how to handle debates over what counts as a thing, or why and how, because Marxism doesn't demonstrate why and how or what a thing is. Anyway, should we get into the video?
Actually, before we started, I just want to say Happy New Year to everyone. 2021 will not be any better. I'm just warning you right now, 2021 will not be any better than 2020. I mean, it can be for yourself, but these are steps that you individually are going to need to take to ensure your own prosperity and survival. Don't expect any kind of real significant improvements to happen on a macro scale. Now you're at the steps where right now we're at the point where you need to take care of yourself first.
Yeah, if you decide to take more steps to living counter-economically than you did in 2020, well, then, your life is probably going to improve a bit, and 2021 will be a better year for you. But yeah, there's sort of a problem with, I've been seeing this hopeful optimism, I guess you could characterize it as, towards the turn of the new year. And I am assuming that it's not like there isn't any sort of there aren't any sort of serious bets being put on 2021 being a better year just because it's a different year. Like, uh, as soon as it becomes January 1st, all of a sudden everything can magically be different. I mean, I don't assume anyone genuinely took that position, but yeah, there's a problem with thinking of society and trends within it as something that you don't, or your interaction with them as something that you don't have any sort of influence over. Um, what people have to realize is that the structures, the institutions, and that exist in society because they have the ability to externalize their operational costs, and they have the ability to build an infrastructure around reinforcing their interests. And their influence over your life is dedicated solely is based solely on the amount of, I don't know, the amount of leverage that they have over you. You know, if you have a white market job, how many of your resources are in a white market bank? How much legally claimed quote unquote land do you have, for instance? Um, these are all degrees of leverage these institutions have over you, and I'm not suggesting that you need necessarily to give them up. But if you worked towards subverting those institutions' ability to sustain themselves and to exercise power over your life, then you will notice a drastic difference, to say the least. And I think that we're starting to see that increasingly. We're starting to see increasingly this happening just because it's becoming impossible for people to make a living in the political economy, in the white market framework that the state tries to defend.
Mm-hmm. Now, yeah, let's go ahead and get started in the video. We were like just jumped ahead a minute because I think that's where we left off. But anyways, let's go.
Why we believe this to be the case. We just assume so because Cold War propaganda told us so. And I got a lot of comments on my planned economies video about how, yeah, Walmart's a planned economy on the inside, but Walmart exists within a market economy. And they would not have been driven to think of all of those innovations in logistics, and they would not be motivated to keep producing profit if it wasn't for the fact that people who are poor starve to death or whatever.
Okay, so Walmart is probably the worst example he could have possibly chosen for this exact point, because although he is absolutely correct in bringing up that Walmart internally is essentially planned economy, much in the same way that any firm is going to be essentially planned command economy, because well they can't exchange resources with themselves because they have ownership over their own resources. This is tautological, but just simply trying to use Walmart as an example of how wonderful and fantastic essentially planned economies are, I think misses the point entirely. In addition to missing a crap ton of nuance, Walmart, for example, is I think I mentioned this in the previous video, the second most heavily subsidized private firm in the United States. And in addition to all of the various indirect subsidies it gets through tax breaks, it gets through there was also this one other thing that they benefited from that allows them to keep their prices outrageously low. Do you know what I'm talking about?
mean, there's dozens of those, if not hundreds. But I mean, there's copyright law, there's corporate law, there's eminent domain, which Walmart greatly benefits from. I don't know what you were thinking though, but just what I was going to say is that it's especially a bad, like when you're talking about price signals and supply and how supply and demand work in a market. Walmart is an especially bad example because it's one of the top firms in the state's political economy. And the reason why that makes it a bad example is because of various forms of application pricing. So, because these institutions like the Federal Reserve exist, and because because the state directly manipulates interest and credit in the white market, and you have all these cartels that are set up to essentially give them first access to new supply as new supply enters in certain areas of the market, certain markets, I should say, not certain areas of the market, but some aspects of this process are planned, which in fact just the fact, pardon the redundancy, that there is what we're broadly thinking of as an economy instead of every different area having a different economy, every neighborhood having a different economy, and every home having a different economy, and those economies being shaped by the actors that associate within them. That in and of itself suggests that a great deal of this process is occurring outside of market signals and is the information that is informing this process is systematically distorted. So using any white market firm, but especially Walmart, is not going to be a good example.
Mm-hmm. It's very. I have a feeling that this is just going to be going into what's it called, cherry picking. But I kind of have his one other thought, but I'm saving it because I'm kind of expecting what his next argument is going to be. So I'm just going to hit continue right now.
And as we all know for a fact, undisputed, that the Soviet Union was full of people who never worked. They weren't threatened to starve to death if they didn't meet their quotas. Therefore, they just sat in their factories and vibed all day. So the lesson for...
No, they weren't threatened starvation if they didn't work. They were just starved.
Or they were thrown into the gulag. That's how they kept their unemployment numbers at zero. It's not that there were actually no people unemployed. It's just that anybody who didn't have a job was forced into slave labor.
Pretty much. Although they kept their unemployment numbers low, so therefore it's proof that the command economy works. Also, I'm not too familiar with the exact workings of the Soviet economy, like just the day to day. However, I would not be surprised at all if a lot of people were just vibing in factories all day, not really doing anything. Because much in the same way that a command economy is going to be producing lots of goods and services that people don't actually want or need, because a centrally planned commissariat is not going to be able to make any good predictions as to what supply and demand curves at any one point in time could ever possibly be like. But you're also going to get misallocation in terms of production, where you're going to have a lot of factories that, due to negligence or what have you, are just simply going to have people in them who just sit on their hands all day being paid to do absolutely nothing. I'm sure that's true. But that again just showcases the extent of a command economy's absolute and horrendous weaknesses in its inability to manage its own resources, which is kind of the argument that Austrians have been making in regards to the problems of command economies and central dominion over resources for, well, as long as the economic calculation problem has been an observation. So really all he's doing is proving our point.
Yeah, and that's the other thing that I was about to get into. If we're speaking strictly from the perspective of market signals, is this his attempt to try to take a crack at the economic calculation problem?
Sadly, yeah, he's trying, but he accidentally
Oh
proved the
no.
economic calculation problem.
Oh no. So this is this is like submental brainlet tier then, because usually they can at least acknowledge the calculation problem, at least in the form that Mises presented it. Of course, they never have a proper understanding of it, or they never represent it properly.
Well, that's
But
exactly what I was.
they at least seem to understand that the concept exists. Yeah, it doesn't even seem like this fucking brainlet even understands that.
No, and I don't know if he's even capable of doing it. I think this is going back to what I was saying earlier in how Marxists amalgamate all arguments critical of Marxism into a single unidentifiable morass that is really only consistent with Hoppianism. But it seems that his understanding of the economic calculation problem basically comes down to the economic calculation. For Mises said that the economic calculation problem that no economic activity could ever occur ever in a centrally planned economy. The fact that there is economic activity at all proves that it's wrong. Ha! Get wrecked, Austria tard. That's probably his understanding, or at least some variation of that. Naturally, nobody actually believes that. Everyone knows that as long as you have two different parties of some sort that have different resources that are interacting, you're going to get some kind of exchange that somehow, and that constitutes economic activity. Doesn't matter if it's centrally planned or not, it is acting. All the economic calculation problem points out is that without price signals, without property rights, and allowing people to determine for themselves what the value or what the subjective value of their own resources are, any kind of exchange that could occur is never going to be rational. That's all it's pointing at.
Yeah, it's an information problem. It's not to suggest that a centrally planned model can't exist, planning can't exist, or that firms can't operate with these in conditions which would make these information problems present. It's just that there are going to be issues sustaining such a model, and there are going to be a series of incentive problems with such models.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not a very difficult concept by any means, but just what I was going to say is this is also, I'm sure this is a bit too high concept for this guy to understand, because he seems to just be operating around that train of thought where if you amalgamate all of these non-Marxist concepts together into something which nobody even comes even remotely close to believing as an actual position, well, then nobody will respond to me because nobody actually believes any of this.
I'm sure Hopkins do.
This is something that we've pointed out previously when responding to Marxists. They attempt to characterize attempts to characterize a defense of the market as a defense of things which exist due to application pricing. So firms which have these economies where they're not even really defined by the consumers and consumer interests, firms within those economies which can scale upwards beyond the actual economies that they exist within due to state privilege and various forms of subsidy. Firms which are, remarkably inefficient and don't seem to respond to consumer interests because most of their interests are just based around appeasing the state, since that's the main thing that allows them to continue existing at that point. There are all these artificial property claims that aren't defensible by homesteading or contract theory that are defended by the state, which these political actors benefit from greatly. And so a lot of people, like the vulgar libertarians particularly, like to look at the 8-hour workday as though, well, that's something that exists because of market incentives. Well, what they never seem to ask, and this is something Marxists definitely don't understand, but why is that the most highly valued preference of both producers and workers, especially as a uniform standard pretty much anywhere that you look? And why does that seem to change arbitrarily depending on what nation you're looking at? It's very obvious that this sort of drudgery, which Marxists think of when they think of the market process, at least from the wage worker side, that is very clearly the result of several degrees of dysgenic incentives created by state manipulation, created by the state intervening, and created by the proprietary manipulation of finance.
Mm-hmm. And Albedo says, this guy looks like a combination of Movie Bob and Mundane Matt.
I can definitely see that.
Mm-hmm.
Mundane Matt is another person who strongly resembles the owner of Alice Toy Barn. In fact, I've seen that comparison made before. So, Matt.
Yeah, for those of you who aren't sure, because I've seen this question a few times, this is Tristan Won't Shut Up. That's the name of his channel. And
Discount Thought Slime.
Yeah, he's basically a Chinese bootleg of Thought Slime. Slightly more, however, he is slightly more pleasing to the eye and slightly less greasy too.
Yeah, I don't know. I gotta say that I think I'd prefer. I can't believe I'd ever say this in any context, but I'd prefer Thought Slime because at least Thought Slime is close enough to making an actual response to positions people have actually argued, that you have a coherent idea of what the discussion actually is or what the other person is actually arguing. You can actually ascribe that position to somebody and it might plausibly come off as a response. Whereas this is like 2 extra degrees of philosophical inbreeding. This is Thought Slime after 2 stages of philosophical inbreeding, where the philosophy they're representing and the principles they're trying to rebut are not. They don't even superficially resemble an actual philosophy.
Mm-hmm. Anyways, let's continue.
Lesson for today, children, is that market economies and competition actually hurt innovation and impede motivation. Let's dig in a little bit, shall we? Hi, I'm a simpleton, or maybe even a moron, and this is Tristan Won't Shut Up. So
Yeah, this is what we were talking about in the previous video, or yeah, in the previous stream, where this guy tries to use thought slime's form of self-deprecation to try to hijack any kind of response or argument that someone could use against him. Like, look, I acknowledge it. I said I'm a simpleton. I said I'm a moron. So therefore, you're just agreeing with me by saying that I'm a simpleton and a moron.
And in reality, all that it does is highlight the fact that they're a moron.
Yeah, pretty much. It's a way of trying to deflect. It's a way of deflecting criticism by trying to be self-aware. When in reality, like once you understand like what's actually going on, you can't just say you're still a moron. You're still a simpleton. You're still an imbecile, and you're still dumb.
All right, let's continue.
Sorry, just had to. I'm contractually obligated.
The main thing that drives the capitalist economy forward is that incentives are driven through the profit motive, or if you're a wage worker, the financial incentive. You know, I think you probably heard the story before.
What the fuck does that even mean?
Incentive. He's just trying to string together some words he probably heard from some conservatards who were attempting to string together an incoherent neoclassical or Chicago school argument, or even some actual libertarian putting forward a solid Austrian critique. He probably saw some of the vocabulary terms that were used, and then just strung them together in an incoherent amalgamation that I was describing earlier in this stream, in an attempt to try to explain a criticism of his own ideas, even though nobody actually would say that people have incentives driven by profit.
Yeah, what's the capitalist economy? What is the financial incentive? What's his idea of profit? Because it's gonna depend on what methodology in economic theory you're talking about. This is it's very specific to each school of thought. You know, profit for the Austrians is going to be different from profit for the monetarists or the neoclassicals. And the financial incentive, well, that changes depending on who we're talking about, because what a resource means to somebody depends on how they're going to utilize it, what they're specializing in, and how they're like what information they have would make that resource more meaningful, and how they interpret that information. That's such an insane thing to say because it's almost meaningless.
He's trying
or at least
sorry.
Or at least to try to characterize this as though you could sort of create what we have now based on these things. These concepts are it's laughable. I'm sorry. I don't even really know how to be more specific than I'm being, but yeah, I mean, and then of course there's the problem with the idea of the capitalist economy, conflating just general economizing with the concept of a political economy, and then there's the problems with capitalism from the perspective of economic study. What the fuck is it?
I think he's trying very hard to explain praxeology, but he's never studied praxeology, doesn't understand praxeology, and doesn't really seem to have any interest in understanding what his opponents actually believe. And so he kind of just goes off of his incredibly broken understanding. If he were to try to come to us and say, what the hell are you guys talking about? I'd be more than happy to explain it. However, I don't think he can look past. I don't think he's capable of even being able to look past profit as anything except a purely materialistic point of view. We would probably be able to try to explain the concept of psychic profits to him, and it would probably just go straight up over his head.
Well, yeah, and that's one of the various problems with Marxist methodology, or the Malthusian approach to studying economics, which Marx seems to embrace, or at least is fancy to. That resources are not a static thing. The concept of specialization is more significant than Marxists even seem to realize, because it's going to change what a resource means, or how useful a resource is to each individual person. Anyway, should we continue?
Yes.
Works. You take a third of your day and sell it for money. And by doing so, you receive money that is used to buy things so that you live. As soon as you dig into like behavioral science and psychology and, data, you start to see that this stuff breaks down. For example,
What the hell? Like, is he trying to explain how just earnings work?
Yeah, I have no idea. There are so many problems here. I don't know if it's just that I'm like experiencing a lack of sleep. That's why I'm having a hard time. Or it's just there are so many problems in single sentences that I don't even know where to begin.
It's probably
Uh,
we're probably just being overwhelmed with with the sheer amount of nonsense and so many concepts being just thrown together haphazardly that it is very difficult to even know where to begin talking about it. But probably think back on this 3 or 4 hours from now and just be like, freaking hell, I should have said that. But for the time being, my mind is fixated on money. You need money.
it's not what I'm fixated on, but yeah, that
No,
is.
it's what I'm thinking about though.
That's a point of interest. What is money? Fiat's not money. I mean, fiat. It's literally called fiat. I mean, it's prescribed by the state, and it only exists because of the monopoly on finance. It's not,
Mm-hmm.
and the only reason that people have any sort of incentive to use it is because of manufactured incentives created by said institutions defended by the state. Money is just an emergent property of economies. What money is just something that's valued by every single member of every single human actor in an economy with the same amount of utility, so that and it's just used as a medium of exchange to achieve specialized resources, to achieve specialized interests, I should say.
Mm-hmm. And let me see here. I forgot what I was actually going to say, but I do like what a bad name Wolfie said in the chat. Capital is not just a number of objects or money, but how you would use them. Thanks, Lockman.
Yeah.
And yeah, let me see.
People definitely should read Lockman, but then there's, getting back to Tristan, there's his characterization of labor as being an amount of time sunk out of your day. I don't even what.
It's like you do know that not everyone is going to be working a 9 to 5.
Well, I mean, and this also suggests that time is measured in terms of utility the same way to every single person, which is hilarious. So I have every person has the same preference for time, apparently.
Yeah, I guess so. So, anyways, let's go ahead and continue.
Deciding that financial incentives are good and probably the best way to get people to be motivated to work shows itself to actually not be the case. In fact, in a lot of experiments, financial incentives can actually decrease one's motivation. So rewards like money do work.
See, this is actually one of the biggest problems with trying to treat economic theory as though it's a prescriptive study, as though it's a study where you base your principles off of models as opposed to basing your principles off of what counts as an exchange and what might inform those exchanges. Because when we're actually talking about, when we're looking at economics, we're looking at how people act, and we're looking at and to look at an economy or a particular exchange, we're looking at just what people do. And the problem there is that this is influenced by factors which literally cannot be taken into consideration when you're creating a model in advance, like environment, how one interprets their environment, what parts of their environment they're interpreting, what they're thinking about, what's motivating them to act, what that motivation means to them and how it influences their behavior. And you have to do this for you would have to do this for every single person, and that's just simply not, that's simply incoherent. So when you but the aspect of this which doesn't get explored as often is what happens when you do try to prescribe models. And the problem you get when you try to prescribe models to explain aspects of economic theory is you have explanations which are effectively defined as being correct. So they're not demonstrated to be true in any meaningful sense, because but when you're attempting to construct these models, you have full control over what counts at the person creating the model has full control over what counts as a resource, what counts as a time frame, what counts as the economy being measured, and so on. So you effectively can draw any conclusion that you want, and there's no checking other than to just have somebody else come along and basically pull shit out of their ass, and make up whatever numbers they want by manipulating charts and creating a figure that says the opposite. But there's no demonstration going on here. There's no counter to the other person's point that's going on here. It's as anti-scientific as it comes.
Well, I mean, I'm listening to his choice of words and how he's presenting this information. It's very clear he's coming at this from the traditional materialist point of view. And this is why I've said for a while now that materialism is a fundamentally incomplete idea. He's looking at economies as though it's just the goods and services that are being moved around, that are being just shuffled from point to point. And he can't see what's going on is people pursuing or people acting in pursuing their most highly valued preferences and their most highly valued interests. That's why I think he's not capable of being able to understand things like praxeology, because to him it just comes off as this weird alien concept of people just acting because they act. It doesn't really make much sense. Doesn't make much sense to him because it fundamentally defies any kind of mathematical modeling or representation that he otherwise believes is absolutely necessary in order to understand behavior. The problem is that he hasn't been able to demonstrate that human behavior can even be modeled or represented or predicted at all.
Yeah, and the basis of reference that he uses, it's hilarious that he doesn't even actually cite models. He just cites random articles which talk about behavioral psychology, which is also a social study, so you can't use prescriptive modeling there either. But it's also an incomplete science because what consciousness is not fully understood. Also, psychology it isn't falsifiable. Say, for instance, you were to propose a theory that somebody has an Oedipus complex, well, and you propose a criteria for why they might have that. I don't know. They hate their mom. Well, if they do hate their mom, that's evidence that they have an Oedipus complex. If they don't hate their mom and they have a healthy relationship with their mom, well, that's an internal reaction against their Oedipus complex, and that's proof they have an Oedipus complex.
Yeah, I think that's Sigmund Freud's thing, and that's psychiatry specifically.
Yeah. Well, that problem exists within psychology too. Psychiatry is just a subcategory of psychology.
I'm not too familiar with that aspect of psychology. I'll need to look into it, but you absolutely do not need to convince me at all about psychiatry because we're on the same page in terms of that just being absolute freaking pseudoscience.
Yeah.
Anyways, I think we should continue here.
All right.
To a certain extent. What it creates is something called temporary compliance. You can temporarily keep somebody motivated in a job or a task by giving them a financial incentive. For example, you could pay someone to turn a crank for 8 hours, and that would work for a day. But if you want to keep that person willing to come back, motivated to keep working day after day, to put in those extra hours, to think of new innovations to keep the thing running, financial incentives actually hurt with those. And studies that try to show financial incentives and rewards like that in creating commitment and habits show that actually rewards are a worse option than doing nothing at all. And so looking at the data, what does increase motivation? There has been tons of research to try and figure out what can we do to get people to be motivated about tasks. And one thing that works really well is group identification. I haven't
really looked at, he does provide a series of sources in the description, and I briefly looked at the first two, and I mean, yeah, I already sort of expressed my grievances towards them. But I mean, I haven't really looked at the other studies, but I'm just hearing him describe their conclusions. I'm already able to see there's a whole host of problems with them. First of all, they appear to operate around the incentive that financial rewards are some sort of static, intrinsic thing, but also that that sort of is what the wage system and the sort of institutionalized aspect of the white market economy we've already gone over before are based around. It's just the fact that this reward structure exists, that somehow means that would somehow create this proprietary monopoly infrastructure on finance and how resources are supplied into nations. I mean, how supply is entering into nations and where that goes into who has first access to it.
Now, I'm actually willing to say that Tristan's onto something here because I have looked into this research a bit in the past oh, this is probably even before I started my original YouTube channel in regards to incentives for people to work. And one thing that I discovered is that at this point that financial incentives to get people to work and to work harder being counterproductive actually does have some merit, since not only has the studies have been able to be replicated several times, but there's also a reasonable explanation as to why, and that is that you're basically paying people to work less, in the sense that if people do a job and they're normally being paid for it, and their boss comes up to them and makes them a deal to give them a certain amount of money if they just work harder, all that's really going to do is incentivize them to work less so that they can be bribed by their boss for more money to go back to a level of greater production, or at the very least moderate production, as opposed to less production. So it does make sense. Now,
Okay.
what's
I
funny?
mean,
Sorry.
well, to clarify, I don't. Yeah, I just didn't. I'm not familiar with any of these studies. That doesn't really necessarily conflict with the point that I was making a moment ago. Just to clarify, I'm not. I'm not really defending the political economy. I'm not defending the wage system. I think that my position specifically, I assume Heretic agrees, is that it's a holdover from feudalism, defended by um, the state discriminating against certain trades and making it so only certain people can innovate can speculate with resources, and there are artificial incentives put in place that stop people from uh, speculating in certain ways. Basically, barriers to entry stop people from being self-employed and, as he put it, vibing in networks with other people who contract together to work on certain projects. Which I'm not. I'm not saying that's always the profitable model, but I think for most people it probably would be.
Yeah, and what's
What were you saying?
I was just about to go into how he's going to try to say that group identity is going to be a greater motivator for getting people to work. Now, I'm skeptical about that. I haven't looked into that particular aspect of motivation, since the studies and research that I looked into in regards to getting people motivated was actually like you could get workers in white market firms to be more productive if the boss just gets out of their way. Instead of just like let me pay you more, the boss says let me get out of your way and just has a more hands-off management approach. It will be more chaotic, but it will stabilize over time, and you end up with greater production. But I think it's going to be interesting to see how he makes the case for group identity and group identification as a way to get people motivated in the future. I do know
So
that
it's
if you can get workers and people who are involved in a project to be motivated for, say, ideological reasons or like causal reasons, like this technology we're working on will change the world, being something that might be a narrative used internally inside of a firm to get people to be motivated to go to work and to put in their best effort. That's completely understandable, but I'm just kind of curious as to what he has to say on the idea of group identity being a motivator.
Yeah, I
So,
was actually just about to ask, since he seems to be suggesting that working for, I guess I'm gonna assume that he is using the Malthusian sense. He's using the Malthusian idea of what a resource is to inform his idea of what the profit incentive is, because otherwise it wouldn't make any sense to say that this is a psychologically destructive thing. And then of course there's the other problems which we just went over. But yeah, so it's basically this meme, the one I just DM'd you. That's how he's going to respond to that.
Most likely, yeah. Anyways, just hitting continue.
If you can make a person feel like they are part of a team or part of a group that is doing something important, they are way more committed to the cause. For example, workers for organizations that are, say, doing nonprofit work, activism, things like that, tend to have way more motivated employees and also volunteers who work for literally nothing, while a for-profit widget corporation has extreme problems getting people to be motivated to keep making them widgets. Because
this is similar to what I was alluding to earlier. However, he kind of got it backwards in the sense that I said that you can get people in a firm, whether it be a charity or even a private or even like a white market production firm, to be very motivated to go to work if they feel like they're doing something important. People who work for and volunteer for a charity might feel like they're saving lives or providing a product, good, or service that genuinely can improve people's lives and change the world for the better through technological innovation. This can be through multiple firms. However, he seems to think that this, if you have people, this can only occur if they're part of a team for some reason. But I mean, like, I'm just thinking about, like, if you get people to identify with a group, the example I can think of, which I'm pretty sure you, SO, have personal experience with, is you get people to be motivated as by making them identify with the group. That would mean that the Walmart chant would be incredibly effective.
Yeah, I definitely recall that.
Yeah, for those of you who aren't aware, Walmart is pretty notorious for during shift changes. Managers, this is different from location to location, but managers will get all of the employees into a place and then just like do the Walmart chant. You can find YouTube videos on it. It's pretty cultish and creepy, but that's like a way to try to get their employees to identify themselves as being Walmart employees. It's, as I said earlier, it's very creepy, but it's kind of funny because Walmart is the example that he actually used much earlier as an example of how effective central planning can actually be. Oh man, this whole thing is just starting to come full circle, isn't it?
Well, yeah, he's using nonprofits here, but he's also using Walmart as a firm, which, by the way, using Walmart as a firm just for as an example for anything it's terrible, because I could tell you, just as someone who had experience working at Walmart. Walmart, it feels very much when you're sitting in there for 8 to 9 hours, constantly looking at the most drab shades of gray and white, and you have all these sort of conflicting incentives between management and the people working on the floor, actually working on the floor. So, yeah, in concept, even before doing his quote-unquote research, this was a bad idea, and I think the entire purpose of the video, it was born out of that annoying thing that Marxists like to do, where they're like, "Oh, well, this is something that we think you guys argue. Well, it actually proves our point." Usually, resorting to equivocation or their usual brand of materialist mental gymnastics to try to justify that conclusion. But yeah, this, in concept, this video, just the fact this video exists shows that Tristan's quite a brainlet, thinking that Walmart is like the example that this imaginary group of capitalist ideologues point to say, yeah, well, this is something that proves our point. Even even vulgar libertarians, usually just they don't point to Walmart as an example of a virtuous market actor. They point to it typically, like if they're going to defend it at all, typically they make the liberty argument. Like, oh well, this actor is being aggressed against by the state, even though that's kind of dubious at best, whether or not Walmart even has a justifiable claim to any of its property, given how much legal privilege it benefits from, and whether or not it's actually the. It depends on the situation, I guess. But most of the time, when Walmart's being defended by vulgar libertarians, it's usually not just Walmart's not the justifiable actor in that situation. But
And
anyway,
just before we begin, bad name Wolfie. Yes, the Walmart chant is a thing. You can look it up on
it
YouTube.
absolutely is.
And Esso has personal experience in it. So, I mean, I'll admit I've never seen it personally, but then again, I've never worked for Walmart. I've probably only ever been in a Walmart like maybe a dozen or so times in my life. So, anyways,
It would probably depend on the location, but the one that I worked at, they did it in the freight room, which you're not gonna see that if you're in the store shopping. It's if you know that little area near the electronic section where this is pretty much the same for every Walmart. Where the bathrooms are and that back door right next to the bathrooms. Yeah, that's where they'll typically do the Walmart chant. Is like it's gonna depend whether or not you have to go down a hallway or whether or not that leads directly into the freight room. But yes, I can confirm that absolutely is the thing.
mm-hmm.
And they make it a point to try to keep it something that is out of sight.
I mean, I can easily imagine why, because people would see it and they think this is really fucking creepy. Why is this creepy thing happening in the Walmart? Anyways, continuing.
Seems the number one way to keep people motivated is to have them realize that what they're doing is making the world a better place. You know, that whole mutual aid thing that Kropotkin figured out like over a century ago. And so the two things that drive up effort, and this is just at like the lowest skill. We haven't even gotten into like creativity and innovative parts yet. But like in the absolute just pure labor happenstance, to keep them motivated, they have to feel like they're contributing to something greater than themselves in a good way. There is one sort of short circuit of this, though, which is that financial incentives really do work for motivation on, as I said, non-innovative tasks, but only if the person is in a financial situation where they are desperate for money, which means that—
Oh my god, you're describing psychic profit. Just what that's basically what this video is well, psychic profit exists and I'm a dumbass Marxist and don't know how to handle that realization, so I'm going to treat that as though that's a notion of the fact that people operate around incentives. No, that's a type of incentive people operate around. Also, Kropotkin described it in mutual aid. That is not supposed to be the driving factor behind mutual aid. The incentive to engage in mutual aid.
I'm reasonably sure that's not the case either. I mean, I have to admit, like, I haven't read Kropotkin yet. I've been meaning to, but the problem is I have a long reading list. But that does not seem reasonable to assume that people would want to do for the sake of doing X. That just sounds like a tautology to me.
Yeah, it pretty much. I mean, it pretty much is, and I've been reading Kropotkin for a video that I have planned at the start of next month, because I'm not going to spoil what that is, but I think the 4th of next month, if I recall correctly, is the 100th anniversary of his death. And no, the video is not going to be in bad taste. But it probably will flip. It probably will flip a few lids, both from the vulgar libertarians and the Marxists pretending to be anarchists.
That should be fun.
Yeah, it's Kropotkin's take on mutual aid is, of course, it's a bit much to go into right now, but he definitely did not argue that people just did things because people did things. That's like the basic ANCAP straw man of that position. And this is the position Tristan here is defending as a defense of Kropotkin.
Well, okay then. Anyways, continuing.
Yes, you can motivate people to work with a salary, but only if that salary is the thing keeping them alive, which is sure a recipe to keep people, working hard at their jobs, but is sort of evil. Now that is like labor work. When it comes to like intellectual labor, when it comes to innovating, thinking of new things, trying to find problems.
He's describing
The hell?
like he's simultaneously describing the political economy as it exists, but also just the fact that even if economies didn't exist, there was literally one person in the world. They could be oppressed by nature because they are hungry and have to work for food.
Well, that sounds
The
that
worker
sounds evil.
starve argument. Yeah, and that's and this is typically. I mean, there's a shred of a decent point here, which is that barriers to entry exist that force people into a very narrow range of things that they could do if they specialize with their resources in a certain way to profit, to meet their most highly valued preferences. Problem, though, is that Marxists can't just say that, because then they would have to acknowledge that it's a problem with the state. So they have to try to make this simultaneously the state and just natural incentives, which creates this weird framework where it almost suggests that they're arguing that you can be oppressed by the fact that you need food.
Also, kind of funny how he tries to say that giving people money so that they don't starve in exchange for them doing a task for you is somehow evil, without even going into why it's evil. It doesn't even give us time to think about it. He just says evil, and then immediately jumps on to the next point, just cuts immediately. It's just something that's thrown in your face without any explanation, or it's absolute. It strikes me as just absolutely manipulative. Anyways, I'm just gonna hit continue again. This will probably be the last segment before we do gotta go.
And I don't know, we could respond to some people in the chat first before we go. So
sure.
Don't leave.
Solutions, financial incentives also don't work. Studies that look into the intersection of innovation and financial incentives show that, again, being motivated by just making a better widget doesn't work as well as following through on someone's. People who work in innovative fields tend to be very interested in solving hard challenges and put them together and give them hard challenges that they have the expertise to figure out the answer to. I know that sounds really simple and it should be, but a lot of tech companies and a lot of corporate environments that try to get innovative tasks out of their creators tend to rely on like giving people financial incentives if, say, they think of a new innovation. You know, if you come up with a solution to an idea, you might get a little bonus for. And what that does in the environment of a group of creatives working on different types of, you know, problem-solving solutions and trying to invent new things, is that leads to competition. The people guard their ideas. They don't collaborate. They don't work well with each other because they're trying to solidify their bonuses. While situations where teams allow...
That's actually a fair point. Problem, though, is that tech firms, the specific example that he gives, management hierarchy, it's, again, very questionable whether or not that's actually something born out of market incentives. Because of all the barriers to entry that the state sets up to make it so this is essentially the only type of firm that can exist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, everything he's talking about here, or at least most of what he's talking about, in terms of the incentives that having financial, or the incentives that the financial incentives creates, is what I was alluding to earlier. I didn't bring up the point that a financial incentive through bonuses encourages people to just be guarding of their own ideas instead of sharing, collaborating. It's a good point. I'm a little embarrassed that I didn't bring it up. It is a good point. But yeah, it's kind of what we were talking about earlier, that there are problems, but
it also creates a form of calculation problem within firms that have a hierarchical management because each level of the firm's internal hierarchy has a disincentive associated conveying information that would be necessary for the firm to internally calculate profits and losses to other levels of management. For example, if we were to take the example of Walmart, if a wage worker who is stocking shelves breaks something, they have a disincentive associated with reporting that, because reporting that would mean that they'd get written up, even though the firm needs that information in order to calculate for losses.
mm-hmm. Don't really have much more to add to that, and I've got to get going. I'm gonna get going soon. So
okay, the last thing I was going to add is, or the management bureaucracy created in a firm like Walmart ensures that information is going to be lost, or it's going to be misinterpreted, or it's simply not going to be communicated as efficiently as it needs to be.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, you need to go.
I need to go soon. So before we jump off, let's go ahead and interact with the chat a bit.
Okay, sure.
So bad name. So if I want to eat, so if I want to eat is bad. Honestly, I'm not entirely sure what you're trying to say there.
Yeah, if you want to eat, that's bad. I'm gonna assume that's what you meant.
Well, I mean, naturally, kind of any kind of coercion that nature puts upon you is. I'm sure you recall, I'm sure you recall these arguments that Marxists make, that because we have needs, or because our needs are not being met, capitalism is oppressive. Yet the fact that we have needs in the first place is an act of nature, so therefore nature is oppressing us.
You're reinforcing your oppressive immune system.
I mean, what is an immune system except an imperialist countermeasure against the poor, oppressed pathogens in your body? They're microbial minorities, and it should be up to us to dismantle our own the system within our own bodies by compromising our own immune system through the introduction of various retroviruses and human immunodeficiency viruses.
Oh God.
I mean, I have a feeling that in about years you probably will actually see places like Slate putting articles about how we need to dismantle systems of cultural oppression in our own biology, not
It's
just in terms of like.
assuming that they even exist in 5 years.
I have a very strong belief that even though the state will almost certainly be going hollow by that point, they'll still be able to scrounge up the money between the or between the couch cushions to be able to keep Slate funded.
Well, yeah, I mean, communication will be decentralized, so there's like there'd be little to no maintenance costs for running a site like that. It's just, would anyone even be reading it at that point?
Keep in mind
nobody reads it now.
Keep in mind that articles still get written and published on MySpace.
Yeah, even though most of them don't have a single click. Actually, let me check in on that after the stream's over, because it's been a while. Yeah, as recently as at least mid-2019, MySpace was still hiring journalists to write articles that like literally nobody reads.
Imagine we were talking about motivation here and what gets people motivated to do certain tasks. Can you imagine how demotivating it must be to be hired to write articles for MySpace, knowing full well nobody will read them ever?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, it's got to be that's got to be demoralizing.
That just sounds like that you would be embarrassed to put on your resume, and as a journalist, you just do it because you need the money. I don't know how much like MySpace journalists get paid for per article, but I'm sure I can't imagine that they have any reason to write other than just to earn a paycheck. It's kind of, it's kind of exactly the kind of stuff that Tristan was talking about here. It sucks actually to be in that position. But anyways, yeah, I do gotta get going now.
All right.
So anyways, yeah, thank you everyone for stopping by.